and good afternoon. We're going to make a start now, so hopefully you're settled, you've got a warm drink, you've got your marking that you've got from after school, or you've got some colleagues around you and you're going to all watch together. And we're going to get right into our presentation today. So thank you ever so much for joining us. You are here to see accessibility on iPadOS so that everyone in your class can succeed. It's going to be presented by myself, Phil Sparrow, and we've got Chris Smith as well today, who we'll introduce in a second. So, you've got me, Phil Sparrow. I'm an Education Development Manager for KRCS. I have 7 years experience as a teacher and teaching assistant in primary schools from early years all the way through to year 6. And now I enjoy embedding tech into classrooms as my day job, living the dream. We've then got Chris Smith, who is our Apple Professional Learning Specialist. He's been an independent consultant in the education sector for over 10 years. He delivers all the training to the schools that KRCS work with and colleges across the country. And today should serve as a little taster for what you could have if you wanted Chris to come and see you. And then a little bit of housekeeping. Don't be shy to speak up. It's all about interaction today. So if you do want to ask any questions about what you're seeing, you want to pay any compliments to the chef, as it were, who will be Chris Smith, who will be presenting to us in a second, just use the chat window. On mobile, that'll be below this video. On desktop, that'll be to the right, so that you can ask us a question throughout, and we'll have a question and answer section later, although myself and Chris will be in the chat to answer any questions. So getting straight into things with our agenda, we've already been through introductions, and next up we've got our presentation on accessibility on iOS. So we'll be getting straight into it to show you, for those students that face barriers to learning, that normally in stereotypical settings you would think that they couldn't access technology, that it's too difficult for them due to motor difficulties, maybe due to auditory or sight-based difficulties. iPadOS can cater to them, so iPad is a suitable device that an amazing tool that can help unlock their potential. We'll have a question and answers session, if there are any, at the end, followed by some next steps that if you like what you see today, we'll be able to show you how you can work with KRCS to implement some things from today into your school and beyond. And then we'll finish up. Hopefully this webinar should run until about 4:30, maybe 4:40 maximum. So that's as long as hopefully we'll need to show you through our wonderful bits and bobs today. And we have got Chris Smith in the chat with us today as well. But without further ado, we are going to make a start. So next up, we're going to have Chris presenting to us and showing us through everything there is to see about iPadOS. So without further ado, we're going to take you over to Chris. Thank you very much, Chris.
So let's look at some of the accessibility options. If I go to my settings and then scroll down to accessibility, I get the whole range of accessibility options that are there. I'm going to look at the vision section here, and I won't look at all of them, but one that I think may be useful to you in school. The first one, Voiceover, is turned off at the moment. As soon as I turn that on, it will start to read all the elements of the screen. So if I had a visual impairment and couldn't read the screen, you'll see what happens when I turn this on.
Landscape. Chart. Voiceover practice. Braille. Speech.
It starts
button.
to read all of the different menu options for me. If I wanted to look at speech, I click onto that.
Voiceover. Voice. Pronunciations. Pitch change. Pitch. 40,
And this is where I could change the pitch, make it higher.
92%.
Or I can make it lower.
16%.
So I can start
17%,
to modify all of the features to meet my personal requirements.
Voiceover.
Go back and I need to turn this off. You may find this happens in school where pupils find this option, turn it on. This is how you turn it off if you don't need it. Moving down, the next one here is the zoom option. And when I come to this and turn the zoom options on, you'll see it brings up this magnifying glass, which I can move around using a little button at the bottom of here. And this will allow me to zoom in to any particular areas that I want. If I double tap onto that small button at the bottom, I can then choose how much it magnifies. I can resize the lens, so it might be that this would be the perfect lens for me, and I can just drag this around and look at different areas of the screen. I'll double tap it again. You can have an on-screen controller. I don't really use that very often, but you're welcome to look at that if you select it here. This is set if I now double tap with 3 fingers, the zoom disappears. So inside some more of the options, you can have keyboard shortcuts to make this happen. You can choose which region of the screen it magnifies. I normally have it as a window, so I can drag that around to what I want to look at. Another feature in here, you can set the maximum it's going to zoom, but one that's really useful is this follow focus. So I'm going to turn this on, and you can do a thing called smart typing. So when you're using the zoom when you're typing, so I'm going to go to notes just to show you how this might work. If I was typing over here, I'm going to double tap with 3 fingers to open up the zoom control. I'm going to put that into here, and if I tap into the screen and put the cat sat on the mat, you can see the whole screen is tracking along with my typing. So it magnifies it, but also follows what I'm doing to make things easier for me to see. And again, double tap with 3 fingers will take that away. I can then go back to my settings, and I leave that turned on the whole time in case I need to demonstrate it. But if you've got a pupil that needs that magnification, turn it on and teach them that a double tap with 3 fingers will bring that option open available to them. So I'm going to go back. This next one is for people with visual impairments, but also for anyone. I use this on my phone. In as much as I don't do the bold text, but I'll show you bold text. It just makes things crisper for you to see. But the larger text, you can turn up the size of the font, and you see it gets bigger on the left hand side, and this will try and increase the size of the font across the device. So if you have trouble reading your text on your iPhone, for instance, you could maybe turn this up a little bit so that it gives you a chance to read it without having to put your glasses on every time. So you can change the overall display size of the text. Further down, increase contrast, and you can see instantly the difference that makes. I won't do all of these, but classic invert just turns the screen with white text on black. And again, this is a favourite of pupils to change this on your iPad, and no one ever knows where to change it back. So that's in here. So if this helps you read the screen, that option is available to you. Further down, this one called colour filters is turned off at the moment. When I turn this on, you can see I've got it on colour tint at the bottom. It's changed the way the screen looks. So I can change the hue of the screen to something that maybe doesn't hurt my eyes looking at it for extended periods, or makes things easier to see. The higher one, the intensity, changes how intense the hue of the screen changes. So this again is personal to every user, but it can be set up. We can put it to grayscale. These ones, they're hard to see, they're very subtle, but if you need a stronger colour, this is where you would go about changing that. So I'm just going to come out of there. Actually, before I go, I will turn that off so my screen goes back to the usual settings. In here, probably my favourite part of the whole vision section is spoken content. So I'm going to go into here and turn on a thing called speak selection. I'm also going to turn on the option to speak the whole screen. And you notice underneath there it says swipe down with 2 fingers from the top of the screen to hear the content of the screen. So I'll demonstrate this in a moment. I don't use a speech controller very often, but if you need an on-screen control because you find that easier, obviously that's where you turn it on. Also, I've turned on highlight content, and I want it to turn highlight the words as it tracks across the page. And I've chosen yellow. You could choose a colour that suits you best. So with those turned on, you then can change the speed at which the voice speaks. If you put it too fast,
speak selection reads selected content.
It's really difficult to understand. If you put it too slow,
speak selection reads
it is possibly the
selected
dullest voice you've ever
content.
listened to. So generally around the middle or just below the middle
Speak selection reads selected content.
Gives you a nice balanced voice that most people will be able to hear and make sense of. Just for your interest, the pronunciation section at the bottom, if there's a word that you type regularly that the iPad fails to speak correctly, you can write them into the pronunciation section phonetically and get the iPad to speak the word correctly. It'd be really annoying if when you sign the end of your story with your name and it pronounced your name wrong every time, so that can be adjusted as well. So now I've turned those on. I'm going to come out of my accessibility. I'll go back to my notes document, and you'll see if I select some text, I have the option for it to speak. I'll tap on speak, and it says it's going to speak in English.
Hello and welcome to KRCS Primary.
Now you'll notice underneath I have the same sentence in French, and this time when I ask it to speak, it knows it's French, so it will speak back to me in French.
Bonjour et bienvenue à KRCS Primary.
So it's not translating, it's just reading out in the language that the iPad detects when you select the text. So it reads to me really nicely. It highlighted the words as it went along. And I think this is a really powerful tool for all pupils, but any pupils that have difficulty in seeing the text, or maybe if they were dyslexic and had difficulty spotting errors, they'd have the chance then to listen to their text read back to them and maybe hear the errors that they'd made, and would help them focus in and correct things. The other thing I need to do is I'm going to go to a website, and I search for a poem here, and I've got a poem by Roger McGough. You notice that the whole page is full of adverts, so what I'm going to do is tap on the two A's at the top, and there's an option to show reader. When I do this, it takes all of the adverts away and just leaves me with the poem that I'm interested in. This is a great way to focus all pupils in, but those with visual impairments, it means it's not a cluttered screen, so it's less tiring for them to make sense of it. Also, once I'm in this section with the two A's, I can change the background, I can invert the text, I can change the font to something that's easy to read, and I can change the size of the font. So there's lots of options in there. But now I've done that, if I wanted to listen to part of this, I select the section that I want. It has speak.
And the railings. All around, the railings. Are they to keep out wolves and monsters?
I can hear the text read to me. So this makes any text an interactive speaking book. And if I wanted to hear the whole poem, if you remember, it says swipe down with two fingers from the top of the screen.
First day at school, a million billion miles from home, waiting for the bell to go where?
Which would allow me
Why
to
are they?
pause it, fast forward, slow down, or return. So that was the speak screen option. So there, audio description is the last one in this section, which if you've got visual content on the screen, like a picture or video, it will give you the audio description of what's going on, so you can get full access to everything that the iPad has to offer, even with visual impairments. So we're going back into our settings. I'm going to go to accessibility, and the next section I want to look at is the physical and motor. This is quite a specialist area, so I will be going over this in not great detail, but just to give you a flavour of some things it will do. The first one in here is touch, and it says assistive touch, haptic touch. These, if you turn these on, means that when somebody's touching the screen, it can accommodate for different types of presses. So if you have a tremor and you touch the screen multiple times, or you press particularly hard, or they're long touches, you can adjust the way that the screen interacts with the touch of the hand to make it personalised to that individual, so it will help them access things more easily. If I go back, the haptic touch again, it says press on display using different lengths of time to reveal content. So you can have long touches and short touches, and in there you'll be able to adjust that to the individual's needs. Next on the list, Face ID and attention. I have this turned on my iPad. It just means I can open the iPad by looking into the camera rather than having to type in an access code. which just makes things quicker and easier for lots of pupils and for lots of teachers. Next one down, this is really special, switch control, and it's sort of thing that you use in special schools for physically disabled pupils. We can attach various devices to the iPad, so we can control everything on the screen by tapping on the switch. That could be with a hand, it could be an arm, an elbow, a foot, nodding a head to left or right. It's just a great way of getting everyone able to access the features of the iPad. It's quite difficult to show without switches, but just to show, at the moment it says I've got 2 switches, and if I move my head to the left, that will select an item. If I move my head to the right, it will go to the home screen. So they're the switches I've got, and that's just using the camera to access them. And then there's different styles of scanning. So I'm going to leave mine on auto just to show you how this works. As I say, it's not a very detailed description, but just so that you're aware of how this sort of thing works. So when I turn on switch control, if I go back to the main screen, so now switch control is on. You can see it's scanning through the different options on the screen. When it gets the option that you want, you tap the switch and it will change the nature of the scan. So I just tap the switch, or in this case move my head, and the scanning changes to a different style of scanning. When it gets to the row that you want, you tap your switch again and it will scan through just the things in that folder, and eventually by tapping one switch or the other, you'll get to be able to open the apps you want to use, control them, and do everything that everyone else can do, that even though you maybe physically can't do it in the same way as them. So I'm going to come out of this and turn this off now. So the scanning has stopped, but you can see the principle of that. When it gets the item you want, you tap on the switch, and this can work with a keyboard as well. So if you can only type by tapping 2 switches or 1 switch, it can be set up to accommodate everyone's needs. Next thing down, voice control. So you can set this up so you can control all elements of the iPad by talking to it. We use this all the time. Well, I use it all the time using Siri. It's the same thing that would work on the iPad. You have to set it up, you have to set the commands you want it to do, but I think that's sort of self-explanatory. Probably not the most ideal solution in the classroom because it would hear so many other voices, but definitely at home or working individually in a quiet area. Top button, you can adjust this. Sometimes you need to do screenshots, or we need to do various things, and pressing the button can be difficulty, so you can set it to be a slower click speed or a faster click speed, and that can trigger either turn the iPad off or trigger Siri coming to life so you can continue with your voice commands. We won't talk about the Apple TV remote, but you can use it to control your TV. The one that I'm using at the moment here is this pointer control. So I'll go into here. Because I've got a Bluetooth mouse connected to the iPad, the pointer comes up on the screen. This can be really useful for people that need to use the mouse to be able to actually see where the pointer is. Also, like myself here, as a teacher demonstrating, if you want to use the mouse, it just makes it easy to show what you're pointing at, and it stands out really well. You can choose the color of the pointer to make it stand out well, and also you can choose how big or small you want the pointer to be. Very last one on here is keyboards. You can attach a full-size keyboard, or you could in fact attach any Bluetooth keyboard to it, so you don't have to use the on-screen keyboard if it's difficult for you. And things like this, I've got this turned on my key repeat. If that's not turned on, if you rest your finger on a key, it will keep typing that letter forever until you take your finger off, whereas I've got mine set that I have to tap it once to make it type the letter once, rather than it keep going on. And that's a really useful skill to have if you don't want it to keep typing when a pupil can't take the finger off the keyboard on screen that quickly. So that's the physical and motor area in the accessibility controls. Going back to my settings, going to the accessibility options, I'm going to now look at the hearing and probably the general in one go. The hearing devices is if you've got a pupil that wears a hearing aid of any sort, there is a compatibility mode. You can connect them via Bluetooth and you can set it up to be exactly the way the user needs it to be. Once that's set up, they'll have a much better experience of using the iPad. Next on the list is sound recognition. If this is turned on, you can then choose the sounds that the iPad can listen out for. So if you're working at home, you had hearing impairment, but you told the iPad to listen for the doorbell, if the doorbell were to ring, the iPad would hear it, and it can give you a warning that somebody's rung the doorbell. So even though you don't hear it, you'll get a visual representation that somebody's at the door. It just helps you access things more easily. Again, these aren't school settings really. It's not something you'd use in school because you'd be working with other pupils and there'd be all sorts of sounds going on. But as a home user, that'd be a fantastic addition to use of the iPad. Next one, audio visual. So here we said it will accommodate headphones. You can change the audio to mono. So if I had a hearing impairment in one ear worse than the other, I could make the audio mono, so the same sounds come out of both ears, headphones at the same time. So if it was in stereo, it could be that somebody's speaking in my left headphone, somebody else speaking in the right, and it would make it difficult for me to hear both, so I can turn it to mono. And you notice here the LED flash alerts. So when I talked about the iPad hearing a doorbell ring, that would give a flash alert so you could see that something would happen rather than having to hear the doorbell yourself. Subtitles and captioning, as you can imagine, if there's a picture on the screen and you find it hard to see what the picture is, it will give you a subtitle. But also if there's a video and you can't hear what's going on in the video, it will give you subtitles to go along with that, so it describes things to you. Further down, guided access. This allows me to lock the iPad into one app, so pupils can't go off and use other apps. There's a little shortcut that you can set up to lock it, and there's a passcode to come out of it. If you're using Apple Classroom, you have this feature built into Apple Classroom, which is a free app, and it means you can lock any number of iPads in your class into one app, so the pupils can't be distracted by leaving the app and going to use something else. Definitely worth looking at. Siri we've talked about, using that for voice control. The accessibility shortcut, you can configure it to open certain accessibility shortcuts by triple clicking the top button, for instance. So if there's something you use all the time, that might be worth looking at. And finally, this per app setting, I've just added Safari to my list, and you can configure it so when a pupil opens Safari, they can by default give it bolder text, larger text, increase the contrast. You can make things specific to the app. So if I'm fine with the camera and it without changing anything, I don't need to change the settings. But when I get to Safari, I find the text or the menus too small, I can configure that in here so that as a user I get the best experience possible and have the ability to access things on the iPad effectively.
And fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Chris, for that. Lots of helpful bits and bobs for us to get with. I've said bits and bobs many times today. But I use so many of those myself when I used to teach. And I mean, Speak Screen, lifesaver for guided reading as well. Absolutely fantastic stuff. So as well as me learning stuff, what have we learned today? Think about what can you take away to impact your use of iPad in the classroom tomorrow, and what are your next steps? If anyone's got any comments, we'll try and endeavour to sort of answer them in the chat, but we seem to be getting on through today just fine. Apple Classroom is such an amazing utility as well to look into. From like Chris has mentioned, you definitely want to look into Apple Classroom. Teaching assistant you wish you'd had, so you can control iPad remotely. It's another fantastic thing. But if you're thinking you really like what you could see today, you liked Chris's advice in the chat, you loved Chris's teaching, it might be worth you thinking, what are your next steps if you want to implement iPad in your school or even Mac more thoroughly? So what could your next steps be with KRCS? Well, we've got Planning Essentials, where we, KRCS, can work closely with your school leadership team to build a plan that can support you from the beginning of introducing devices or a new wave of devices, all the way through to them landing in students and teachers' laps and helping them get on their way with some training and support. If you are already a little bit further along and you're maybe wanting to zoom in on your curriculum, we could help you with our Curriculum Essentials talks. And you could have a hands-on workshop with Chris, our Apple Professional Learning Specialist, and just see what your teaching could look like if you wanted to evolve it with iPad in your classrooms. So feel free to get in contact with us either way on those next steps. But this stream has now ended. But here's where to find us if you want to talk to us about anything you've seen today, or you want to talk about some new hardware, software, or support you can get in your school. If you want to email our education team, you can talk to us at edsales@krcs.co.uk. You can give us a call on 0115 985 1797 and ask to speak to the education team. You can follow us on Twitter at KRCS_education. Or if you are a teacher and you're looking for some in-store discount, you can visit one of our high street retail stores in Nottingham, Derby, or Hull, where we'll be glad to give you a discount on a Mac, should you so wish. But thank you very, very much for attending our webinar today. We'll leave up this information for a few minutes for yourselves, and if there's any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat whilst we're here for 2 or 3 minutes. Otherwise, we will see you next time for our next webinar coming up. Thanks very much.